My name is Hannah Fishburne, and my project is focusing on the causes and effects of rape culture. I am going to issue a trigger warning as this does contain some sensitive subjects, as is evident from the title. And to answer my central argument is that rape culture is cyclical in nature, in that the effects of rape culture also contribute to the upholdance of it and maintenance. So for my presentation, first I'm going to start with the causes of rape culture, then I'm going to get into effects on society, then effects on the victims, and I might also include some discussion on what can be done to combat this. Causes of rape culture. So first of all, rape culture was identified and described as can be identified and described as a culture of misogyny and sexism that provides justification and even casual support for sexual violence, and that's any sexual violence or sexual harassment, whether it's rape or simply groping. And the causes that I have identified come from different papers, a lot of which borrow heavily on the works of Martha Burke, who identified the first model of the causes of rape culture in the 1980s. So one of the causes I've identified is the role of traditional gender roles. These ascribe certain attributes and jobs in society to people of different genders, traditionally within the gender binaries. They don't usually take into account non-binary people. For example, some of these might be that a woman's place is in the kitchen. And this reinforces rape culture by supporting the idea that men are supposed to be more dominant and in charge, and a woman's place is to serve a man. There's also something to note with benevolent sexism, which is sexism used not to harm women, but is still harmful as it is sexism. Beliefs such as like women need to be protected and men are the protectors. Those also contribute to rape culture. So one of the other causes I've identified was toxic relationships in the media. Books, TV shows, movies, other media forms often romanticize toxicity in relationships. This is a big topic of discussion in the young adult fiction community. This gives people a warped idea of what a healthy relationship is and what healthy communication in a relationship looks like. And it can lead to confusion as to what is consensual and what is not. For the example, I put a picture of Bella and Edward from Twilight because that is a textbook case. Edward crosses multiple lines, such as literally crawling through Bella's window to watch her sleep. And that is written off as, it's a result of his love for her. It's romantic. It's not creepy, it's romantic. And another cause that I've identified was adversarial sexual beliefs, which are beliefs that relationships between men and women are inherently transactional in nature. And the purposes of rape culture, this would be the currency is sex. It caters to the stereotype about how men only want one thing or how women play hard to get. They want sex. This also leads to confusion about consent and expectations for intimacy in relationships, because the price for going home with a man is having sex, transaction, which I should not have to emphasize is not and should not be true and seen as fact. Lastly, another thing that I've identified was the objectification of women, particularly sexual objectification of women. Media like ads, movies, music videos, video games, and shows often sexualize women and objectify them. For example, this beer ad, which there is really no need for a woman in bikini to advertise beer, but sex sells. And these ads reduce them to nothing more than their bodies. This also contributes to rape culture by painting the female body as inherently sexual. So it gives the idea that when a woman has her body on display, she's inviting sexual advances, which is not true. Most women dress for themselves, not for other people. Additionally, treating women like objects to sell products also makes people view women as objects that they are entitled to. Some of the effects on society that I've identified are in dress codes and catcalling. This is the first one on the list because it's often the first way girls are introduced to rape culture, usually at a young age, sometimes even before puberty. And it's a result of the sexualization of female bodies and the objectification of females. But it also perpetuates that sexualization because as soon as you enforce a rule caused by the sexualization of women, that also turns around and enforces the sexualization of women because it confirms it. Another effect on society is self-defense. Women live with the very real fear of assault. In response, we're given defense tips and other ideas on how to avoid being victims. For example, this lovely self-defense tools kit for what specifically meant for women. This also perpetuates rape culture by placing the crux of the responsibility on women and not addressing the actual problem, which is the rapists themselves. Another effect of rape culture on society is the effect on the justice system. Rape myths are basically myths about rape that come from misconceptions that stem off of rape culture itself. And when a rape doesn't conform to those rape myths, it is sometimes not seen as a real rape and gets a more lenient sentencing. One example is the case of Brock Turner, who assaulted Chanel Miller in about 2016, I believe. And he was only given months, like a matter of months in prison, and then a few years on probation because of his status as a Stanford athlete and because of Chanel Miller's status at the time of an unconscious victim, because that didn't fit the myth of woman walking home alone gets jumped by a stranger that is, ooh, scary, and is attacked, fights back. She reports right away in tears, horrified. That led to the fact that did not conform to those stereotypes led to the sentencing that happened in this case. This also affects the news and the coverage of those cases because the news also will then portray rapes that don't conform to those real rape myths as less important, or even partially or even fully the victim's fault. With the Brock Turner case, it drummed up sympathy for Brock Turner himself, as well as putting Chanel Miller in the line of blame and questioning. I read in her autobiography about how she saw one comment that actually blamed her for being the predator because she, quote, hooked up with a freshman, which is insane. She was unconscious at the time. She could not consent to it. That's not hooking up. That's assault. There are things that do there are movements that do help combat rape culture, such as the Me Too movement and the Riot Grrrl movement. These don't generally contribute to rape culture. There are ways that combat it. The Me Too movement started in 2006 by Tarana Burke. It was made into a hashtag movement in 2017 after Alyssa Milano's tweet "Me Too" in response to a friend's post saying, "Hey, if you've been sexually assaulted or experienced anything like that, anything like sexual harassment, tweet, Me Too, or post Me Too." Although originally the Me Too movement was actually not meant to call people out, but to give support, primarily to underrepresented victims like the Black poor communities. So the Riot Grrrl movement started out of a need for female representation in punk, but it also gave women space to work with each other, build support networks, and share their stories. There were songs that included experiences with sexual assault or any form of sexual violence, really. For example, Heavens to Betsy's My Secret. And Kathleen Hanna, the lead singer of Bikini Kill, did at some of her earlier concerts give the mic over to women in the audience so they could share their stories. And lastly, I'm going to talk about the effect on victims and survivors. Chanel Miller is the survivor of the Brock Turner sexual assault case, and she talked about how she, in her autobiography, Know My Name, which is why I keep emphasizing her name, she talks about how the media coverage of her sexual assault impacted her perception of herself, kind of making her feel as though she was worthless or worth less than others. And the hashtag "Why I Didn't Report" trend started after Christina Blasey Ford went public about past sexual assault by Brett Kavanaugh. And it talks about why women didn't report their stories right away. And it includes things like having the assault having been done in a relationship where the victim didn't even recognize it as sexual assault. Also, fear of losing face in public, internal shame and guilt because they thought it might be their fault. This comes as a result of victim blaming or misidentification of or the real rape myth. And also causes perpetuates rape culture by preventing reports of it, which could help combat rapes that actually, when they do happen. Additionally, it may be worth note that Christine Blasey Ford actually had to hire people to protect her family because the public went after her for going public about her sexual assault, which obviously had a huge effect on Christine Blasey Ford and her family. And then I am going to mention a few things that I think could be done to combat rape culture. One of them is work on dispelling the rape myths that perpetuate it. Another is to teach men about proper consent, starting even from a younger age, because schools in different countries, in European countries, do teach sex ed in some way, shape, or form from a younger age, and they have lower rape rates. And lastly, my works cited is here with all of the pictures that I have used. Thank you.